Eleanor's finger tightened on the trigger. The man who'd killed her husband stood 3 feet away, his gun pressed to her temple. Behind her, 12 armed men waited for a clear shot. In front of her, certain death. She had one chance, one move, 1 second to choose between survival and surrender. But to understand how a Boston schoolteacher ended up here, facing down the most dangerous outlaw in 3 territories, we need to go back. Back to the night she knocked on a stranger's door, bleeding and desperate with nothing left to lose. Back to the beginning. Eleanor's fingers were slipping. Blood, warm and thick. It ran down her arm as she clutched her daughter's small hand. The Nebraska darkness pressed close on all sides, vast and empty and merciless. 3 miles back, her legs had stopped working properly. 2 miles back, she'd stopped feeling the pain in her ribs. 1 mile back, she'd started seeing lights that weren't there. But the light ahead was real. A single yellow glow flickering in the distance. A lamplight, a window, a door. "Mama, please wake up." Emma's voice was small, too small for a 7-year-old girl who'd been walking for 3 days straight, too small for a child who'd watched her father die, too small for what she'd seen and afterward hiding beneath a wagon while men laughed and her mother screamed. "Mama, please don't die." Eleanor couldn't answer. Her throat was raw from screaming, from begging, from the breath they'd shoved in her mouth that final night. Her vision swam. The light ahead doubled, then tripled, then merged back into one. She fixed her eyes on it. 1 foot, then another, then another. Somewhere behind them, men were hunting. She could still hear their voices in her head. The leader's voice, cold and smooth and certain. "Find them. The woman saw my face, no witnesses." That had been this morning, or yesterday morning. Time had lost meaning somewhere between the attack and the walking, and the blood and the fear. All Eleanor knew was that she had to keep moving, had to keep Emma safe, had to reach that light before her body gave out completely. The house materialized slowly from the darkness. Wood frame, single story, a barn to one side. Corrals, the shapes of horses moving in the night. Not a large ranch, but established. Lived in. Real. Eleanor's knees buckled at the porch steps. She caught herself on the railing, felt splinters dig into her palm. Good. Pain meant she was still alive, still conscious, still able to protect her daughter for one more minute, one more second. "Emma," her voice came out as a whisper. "Knock on the door." "Mama, you're bleeding again." "I know, baby. Please, knock on the door." Emma's small fist hit the wood, once, twice. The sound was barely audible over the wind that swept across the empty prairie. The little girl looked back at her mother, eyes wide with fear that no child should know how to wear. "Harder, sweetheart." Emma knocked again. Harder this time. Then again. Then she started calling out, her voice thin as paper in the vast Nebraska night. "Please, please, is anybody home?" Inside the house, a man had been staring at the same spot on the wall for the better part of an hour. William Bennett sat in his reading chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The whiskey had gone warm. The fire had burned down to embers. Outside, the Nebraska wind howled like something wounded, but Will barely heard it. He'd stopped hearing most things 5 years ago, right around the time he'd stopped caring whether he lived or died. The knock came small and hesitant, like a bird tapping at a window. Will's hand moved to the revolver at his hip before he'd made any conscious decision to move. Visitors didn't come to the Bennett Ranch. Not anymore. The folks in Cedar Ridge had learned to leave him alone, and he'd learned to prefer it that way. "Please, whoosh," a child's voice. Will was at the door before his mind caught up with his body. He pulled it open, and the lamplight revealed a sight that stopped his breath cold. A little girl stood on his porch. 7 years old, maybe 8. Blonde hair matted with something dark. A blue calico dress torn at the sleeve and stained across the bodice in a way that made Will's stomach turn. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes were steady. Too steady for a child who'd seen whatever had put that blood on her dress. "My papa died," she said. The words came out flat, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing them during however long she'd been walking. "Bad men shot him. Can we please sleep in your barn tonight? Mama's hurt real bad. She can't walk no more." Will's gaze dropped past the child to the porch railing. His heart damn near stopped. A woman lay crumpled against the wooden post, barely visible in the fading light. Even from where he stood, Will could see she was in terrible shape. Dress torn, face swollen, one arm bent wrong, blood dark and thick pooled beneath her on the weathered boards. Jesus Christ, Will breathed. He was moving before he could think, kneeling beside her, his hands hovering with the practiced caution of a man who doctored wounded soldiers during the war. He knew what trauma looked like. This woman had seen more than her share. Her breathing came shallow and labored. Each exhale was a small whimper that cut through him like a blade. Up close, he could see bruises around her throat, defensive wounds on her arms, cuts that spoke of fighting back, and other signs, signs that made his blood run cold with a fury he hadn't felt in 5 years. Mama fell down a lot, the little girl said behind him, something in her voice, the careful way she said it. It told Will this child was protecting her mother even now, wrapping horror in innocent words. What's your name, sweetheart? Will kept his voice gentle, even as his mind cataloged injuries. Cracked ribs at minimum, dislocated shoulder, cuts on her arms, defensive wounds from fighting back, and worse, much worse. Emma, Emma Hayes, that's my mama. Eleanor. Well, Emma Hayes, your mama ain't sleeping in no barn tonight. Will stood wiping his hands on his jeans. The little girl looked up at him with those two old eyes. Neither are you. Can you get that door open wide for me? I'm going to carry her inside. Emma nodded quickly, her small hands pushing until the door swung fully open. Will slid his arms beneath Eleanor Hayes with a care he hadn't felt in years, lifting her, like she was made of something precious and fragile. She weighed almost nothing. Up close, he could see she'd been starved as well as beaten. Her clothes hung loose on a frame that might have been slender to begin with, but was now skeletal. As he carried her across the threshold, Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. Green eyes, the color of new spring grass. They fixed on his face with confusion and raw terror. No, she gasped. Please, no more, please. You're safe, Will said quickly. I ain't going to hurt you. I'm just getting you to a bed. You hear me? You're safe now. But her eyes had already rolled back. Consciousness left her again. Will felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Not anger at her, anger at whoever had done this. He'd seen his share of violence during the war, had committed his own share too. But this kind of brutality toward a woman and child ignited something in him he'd thought long dead. He laid her on the bed in the back room. The bed he'd shared with Caroline. The bed where she'd started bringing their son into the world. The bed he hadn't been able to sleep in since. He could see it in the bruising on her thighs and the way her dress had been torn in 100 small signs that told a story he wished he didn't know how to read. Emma returned with the water and Will set her to finding clean cloths while he dampened a rag and began gently cleaning the blood from Eleanor's face. Up close beneath the bruising and swelling, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 28. Features that might have been pretty once before pain had carved itself into every line. Is Mama going to die? Will turned to find Emma standing in the doorway clutching a bundle of cloths. Her voice was so small, so terrified, that something broke open in his chest. He looked at this brave, traumatized child who'd somehow kept them both alive long enough to find help. Not if I can help it, he said, but I need to look after her wounds, and that means you need to wait in the other room for a spell. Can you do that for me? Emma's chin trembled, but she nodded. Will you call me when she wakes up? The second she opens her eyes, I promise. After Emma had retreated, Will worked carefully and methodically. He doctored enough wounded soldiers to know what needed doing. He reset Eleanor's dislocated shoulder with a quick, practiced motion that made her cry out even in unconsciousness. He wrapped her cracked ribs with strips torn from an old sheet. He cleaned her cuts with whiskey, watching her face for signs of returning awareness. When he finished, he dressed her carefully in one of Caroline's old nightgowns. His movements were clinical, respectful. He covered her with quilts and stood looking down at her. She looked impossibly fragile against the white pillows. Her dark hair spread like spilled ink. But she was breathing steadier now, and color was returning to her cheeks. He'd done what he could. The rest was up to her body's will to heal and God's will to let her. Will found Emma curled in his reading chair, hugging her knees to her chest. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, as though she'd cried herself out long before reaching his door. Your mama's resting, he said gently. She's hurt bad, but I think she's going to make it. Can I see her by an instant? In a bit. First, I need to know something. Will knelt so he was at her level. When's the last time you ate? Emma's face went blank. That careful, practiced blankness that no child should know how to wear. I don't remember, she said. Then let's fix that. He led her to the kitchen and set about cooking. Eggs from his chickens, bacon he had smoked himself, bread that was 3 days old but still good enough. Emma watched from the doorway, tracking his every movement, like a wild animal watching a stranger. You know how to cook? She asked, surprised. I know how not to starve, Will replied, cracking eggs into the cast iron. Learned it the hard way after my wife passed. Your wife died too. The question, so matter-of-fact, hurt to hear from a child's mouth. She did. 5 years ago now. Were you real sad? Will paused, spatula in hand. No one had asked him that in 5 years. Everyone just assumed or avoided the topic entirely. I was, he said quietly. Still am some days, but mostly I'm just here. That's how I feel about Papa. Emma climbed onto a chair at the table. Like I should be sadder, but I'm too tired to be anything right now. Will turned to look at her properly, this little girl with old eyes and a soldier's weariness. You loved your Papa. Yes, sir, he seemed real nice in the letters Mama showed me. And when we met him in Independence, he smiled a lot. He bought me peppermint candy and told me I could call him Papa if I wanted. Emma paused, her voice dropped to a whisper. We only knew him 3 weeks. Mama married him the day we got off the train. Then we started west, and the bad men came. Papa tried to fight them, but they shot him. He told us to run, and we did. But I heard the guns. Her voice got smaller. And then later, when it got dark, the bad men found us anyway. They hurt Mama real bad. I tried to make them stop, but I'm too little. Will's grip tightened on the spatula handle. How many men? I don't know exactly. Maybe 5. It was hard to see. They had bandanas on their faces. Emma pulled at a thread on her dress. Mama screamed a lot. I hid under the wagon like she told me to, but I could still hear. And when they left, I found Mama, and she was... The little girl's voice broke. She was just laying there, not moving. I thought she was dead like Papa. Emma, Will waited until her eyes met his. Look at me. She did. You got your Mama here. You walked how far? 3 days, maybe more. We slept in a cave one night and under a tree another. Mama kept falling down, so we had to go slow. Sometimes I had to drag her. Will felt his throat tighten. You kept your Mama alive for 3 days and got her to safety. That ain't being too little. That's about the bravest thing I ever heard of. Tears welled in Emma's eyes then, the first real emotion breaking through her careful composure. I was so scared, she whispered. I thought she was going to die like Papa, and then I'd be all alone. Will set down the spatula and knelt in front of her. His joints protested, but he ignored them. You ain't alone now. You hear me? Long as you're under my roof, you ain't alone. Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Will found himself holding the small, trembling child while she finally let herself cry. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed, to have someone depend on him for comfort. It was terrifying and heartbreaking and strangely healing all at once. They stayed like that until the eggs started to burn. Will stood quickly, lifting her with him and setting her in a chair. He scraped the eggs onto a plate, overdone but edible. He added bacon and bread with butter and set it in front of her. Emma ate like she was starving, which she probably was. She paused only to gulp water from the cup he gave her, her eyes darting constantly toward the bedroom door. She'll still be there when you finish, Will assured her, I promise. After she'd eaten everything on her plate and half of what he'd put on his own, Will led her to the bedroom. Eleanor lay exactly as he'd left her, breathing deep and steady now. Emma climbed carefully onto the bed and curled against her mother's side, her small hand resting on Eleanor's arm. Will you stay, she asked Will, in case she wakes up scared. So Will dragged his reading chair into the bedroom and settled into it, watching over these 2 broken souls who'd stumbled into his life. Outside, the Nebraska night pressed close, full of stars and silence. Inside, for the first time in 5 years, his house felt less like a tomb and more like something he couldn't quite name yet, but it felt like the beginning of something. Eleanor woke to pain. Everything hurt. Her ribs screamed with every breath. Her shoulder throbbed where it had been wrenched from its socket. Her face felt swollen and tight. She tried to remember where she was, how she'd gotten here, but her memory was fragmented. Pieces of horror floating in darkness. 6 months of letters from a man named James Fletcher. The train to Independence, Missouri. Meeting him for the first time. Kind eyes, gentle voice. A hasty wedding performed by a circuit preacher because they needed to join the wagon train west. 3 weeks of learning to share a wagon with a stranger who was now her husband. 3 weeks of shy conversations and careful touches. 3 weeks of thinking maybe this marriage of convenience could become something real. Then gunfire. James' falling blood spreading across his shirt while he shouted for them to run. Running, hands grabbing her, tearing, hurting, Emma's small voice crying. Eleanor gasped and tried to sit up, but firm hand pressed her gently back. Easy now, a man's voice said. You're safe, you're hurt bad, but you're safe. Terror flooded through her. Her eyes flew open to find a stranger's face above her. Older than James had been. Weathered features, gray threading through dark hair, brown eyes that held something steady and sad. Where is Emma? Her voice came out raw, broken. Right here, Mama. And then Emma was there, her small face appearing beside the stranger's. Tear-streaked but whole, alive. This is Mr. Will. He helped us. He made me eggs and fixed your hurts and says we don't have to sleep in the barn. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. You're okay. They didn't hurt you. You're okay. I'm okay, Mama, I promise. The stranger Will stepped back to give her space. Your daughter walked you here over 3 days, he said. She's something special, Mrs. Hayes. Just Eleanor. She looked around the room, taking in the simple furniture, the clean sheets, the nightgown she was wearing. A woman's nightgown. Where are we? My ranch, about 10 miles south of Cedar Ridge. You're in my bed. Didn't have anywhere else fit for you. He paused. I doctored your wounds. Nothing else. You're safe here. Eleanor wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But trust felt like a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. She'd trusted the world to be fair, and it had taken a husband she'd barely begun to know. She'd trusted the night to hide them, and it had delivered them to monsters. How could she trust this stranger no matter how kind his eyes seemed? As if sensing her thoughts, Will moved toward the door. I'll give you and Emma some privacy. There's water on the nightstand. Don't try to move too much. You got cracked ribs, a shoulder that was dislocated, and more bruises than I could count. Mr. Will, he stopped. Why? Eleanor forced the word out. Why would you help us? He was quiet for a long moment. Because you knocked, he finally said, and I was tired of keeping the door closed. After he left, Eleanor pulled Emma close and wept into her daughter's hair. They were alive. Against everything, despite those men and what they'd done, they were still alive. She didn't know yet that William Bennett was a man haunted by his own ghosts, that he'd been dying by inches in this house for 5 years, that her arrival would be the beginning of something neither of them expected. All she knew was that Emma was safe and warm and alive. For now, that had to be enough. The next 3 days passed in a fever haze for Eleanor. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes waking to find Will spooning broth into her mouth, other times waking to Emma's hand clasped in hers. In her delirium, she relived the attack. James falling after knowing him only 3 weeks. The men laughing, the pain endless and terrible. Each time she woke screaming, it was Will's calm voice that brought her back. You're safe, Eleanor. You're here with me and Emma. Nobody's going to hurt you, not while I'm breathing. On the 4th day, her fever broke. Eleanor woke with a clear head for the first time since the attack. Sunlight streamed through a window, and from somewhere outside she could hear Emma laughing. Actually laughing, and a man's deeper voice answering. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her ribs. But she was awake, truly awake, and desperate to see her daughter. Emma, she called. Her voice was stronger than before. The door opened. Will appeared wiping his hands on a dishcloth. You're awake, good. How you feeling? Like I got trampled by horses. Where's Emma? Outside feeding the chickens. She's been asking about you every 5 minutes. I'll fetch her. Wait. Eleanor struggled to sit up against the pillows. Mr. Bennett. Will, I need to know something. She met his eyes. How long can we stay? He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. Long as you need. That's not an answer. It's the only one I got. He paused. Look, I ain't asking for anything. You need a place to heal. I got one. Your daughter needs somewhere safe. This is it. When you're strong enough to decide what comes next, you can decide. Until then, you rest. Why? The word came out sharper than she'd intended. I don't understand why you're doing this. Men don't just... I ain't those men. The words were quiet, but they hit like thunder. I know what they did to you, Will continued. I saw the evidence when I doctored you. And I know you got no reason to trust any man right now. But I'm telling you, true Eleanor. Long as you're under my roof, no one's going to hurt you. Not those men. Not anyone. Eleanor stared at him, searching for any hint of deception, any sign of ulterior motive. She found only weariness and determination in that deep, persistent sadness. I don't know how to thank you, she finally said. Don't need thanks. Need you to rest and heal so you can be strong for that little girl of yours. He straightened. I'll get Emma. Emma came bursting through the door. Moments later, face alight with joy. Mama, you're really awake. She climbed carefully onto the bed, mindful of Eleanor's injuries. Mr. Will said you would wake up, but I was scared you'd sleep forever, like in the fairy tales. I'm awake, baby. Eleanor wrapped her good arm around her daughter. Tell me everything. What have you been doing? And Emma did, words tumbling out in an excited rush. She told Eleanor about the chickens and how Mr. Will taught her to collect eggs without scaring them. About the barn with the horses, two of them both beautiful. About helping make biscuits, even though hers came out lumpy. And Mama, he carved me a doll. See, Emma held up a simple wooden figure carefully shaped and sanded smooth. He said every little girl needs a doll, and since we left mine back east, he made me a new one. I named her Hope. Eleanor's throat tightened. That's a beautiful name, sweetheart. I thought maybe she could be friends with the old doll's spirit. You know, in heaven with Papa James. Eleanor pulled Emma close, breathing in the smell of her hair. Her daughter, who'd seen horrors no child should witness, was still capable of naming a doll Hope. Maybe Eleanor thought maybe that was enough to keep going for. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching her new doll, Will brought Eleanor broth and bread. She ate carefully, watching him move around the room with quiet efficiency. Thank you, she said, for the doll. Emma hasn't stopped talking about it. Carving keeps my hands busy. Will settled into the chair by the bed. Keeps my mind from wandering places it shouldn't go. Eleanor studied him in the lamplight, the lines around his eyes, the gray in his stubble, the way he held himself like a man carrying a weight he'd never set down. You lost someone, she said. It wasn't a question. Will was quiet for a long moment. My wife, Caroline. Our son, too, though he never drew breath. 5 years ago come winter. I'm sorry. So am I. He looked at his hands. She died in that bed you're lying in. Tried to bring our boy into the world, but something went wrong. I couldn't save either of them. Eleanor's heart clenched. She was lying in a dead woman's bed wearing a dead woman's nightgown, being cared for by a man who'd lost everything. Why did you help us? She asked again. The truth this time. Will raised his eyes to hers. Because when I heard your daughter's voice asking if anyone was home, I thought maybe God was giving me a second chance. A chance to save someone since I couldn't save them. He stood abruptly. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll talk about what comes next. But at the door he paused. Eleanor. Yes. I meant what I said. Long as you're here, you're safe. Whatever happened before, whoever did those things to you, they ain't getting near you again. Not while I'm still breathing. After he'd gone, Eleanor lay staring at the ceiling. She was in a stranger's house, wearing a dead woman's clothes, hiding from men who'd killed the husband she'd barely known and done unspeakable things to her. But for the first time since that terrible night, she felt something other than fear. She didn't have a word for it yet, but it felt like the faintest possibility of hope. The days that followed took on a rhythm Eleanor hadn't expected. She woke each morning to the sound of Emma's laughter drifting through the window, mixing with the deeper rumble of Will's voice. She'd lie there for a moment listening, letting herself believe they were safe. Then the memories would come flooding back, and she'd have to remind herself to breathe. By the end of the first week, Eleanor could walk from the bedroom to the main room without collapsing. Will had rigged a makeshift crutch from an old broom handle, and Emma hovered constantly ready to catch her mother if she stumbled. You're pushing too hard, Will said one morning, watching Eleanor struggle to the kitchen table. Doc Webb from town said you need rest, not exercise. You brought a doctor here. Rode out 3 days ago while you were sleeping. Wanted to make sure I hadn't missed anything. Will poured her coffee. He said you're healing good, but you got to take it slow. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm cup. I can't just lie in bed while you do everything. I'm not helpless. Nobody said you were. Then let me help. Let me do something useful. Will studied her for a long moment. You know how to cook. I was a teacher back in Boston, but yes, I can cook. Something shifted in his expression. Interest, maybe. A teacher? What did you teach? Reading, writing, arithmetic. Children mostly, ages 6 to 12. Emma piped up from where she sat at the table. Mama's real smart. She taught me letters back in Boston before we decided to come west. That's so, Will said. Emma mentioned you were planning to teach her to read whole books once you got to Oregon. The mention of their destination, the dream that had died with James Fletcher, made Eleanor's chest tighten. That was the plan, she said quietly. James had land waiting. A fresh start for all of us. Will was silent for a moment. Then he stood and retrieved something from a shelf above the fireplace. A small stack of books, worn but well cared for. Caroline's, he said, setting them on the table. She loved to read. Used to read to me at night back when things were good. He pushed the books toward Eleanor. Maybe you could teach Emma with these. Give you something to do while you're healing. Eleanor touched the spine of the top book. A collection of poems, the leather soft with age. You're sure Caroline would have wanted them used, not just sitting there collecting dust. That afternoon, Eleanor sat in the reading chair with Emma on her lap and began teaching her daughter to read from a dead woman's books. Will worked nearby mending a bridle, but Eleanor caught him watching sometimes. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable. More like a man seeing something he'd thought was gone from the world. The cat sat on the mat, Emma sounded out carefully. Good baby. What's the last word in mat? Emma beamed. The cat sat on the mat. Perfect. You're doing so well. Mr. Will, did you hear? Emma called. I read a whole sentence. Will looked up from his work, and Eleanor saw something crack in his careful composure. A warmth he was trying to hide. I heard, he said. Pretty soon you'll be reading better than me. Can you read, Mr. Will? Some. Enough to get by. Never had much schooling. Emma looked at Eleanor, then back at Will. Maybe Mama could teach you, too. She's a real good teacher. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. Emma, I'm sure Mr. Will doesn't need... I wouldn't mind it, Will said quietly. If you're willing, I mean. Always wished I could read proper. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them that Eleanor couldn't name. I'd be happy to, she heard herself say. So the lessons expanded. Emma in the mornings working through simple words and sentences. Will in the evenings, after Emma had gone to bed, stumbling through more complex passages while Eleanor guided him patiently. This word here, Will said one night, pointing at the page. I can't make sense of it. Eleanor leaned closer to look. Redemption. What's it mean? It means being saved, being forgiven for things you've done wrong, getting a second chance. Will was quiet for a long moment, staring at the word. Redemption, he repeated slowly. That's a good word. Then it is. He looked up at her then, and the rawness in his eyes made Eleanor's breath catch. You think everyone can get that redemption? Eleanor thought about James Fletcher, a man she'd known for 3 weeks, dying in the dirt trying to protect his new family. About the men who'd hurt her. About herself sitting here in a stranger's house, trying to remember how to feel human again. I think we have to believe they can, she said. Otherwise, what's the point of going on? Will nodded slowly and returned his attention to the book. But something had shifted between them. Something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. 2 weeks after her arrival, Eleanor insisted on cooking dinner. You don't have to prove anything, Will said, watching her move around his kitchen. I'm not proving anything. I'm thanking you. There's a difference. Already told you I don't need thanks. And I already told you I'm not helpless. Eleanor turned to face him, hands on her hips. Let me do this, Will. Please, I need to feel like I'm contributing something. He held up his hands in surrender. All right, but if you get tired, you stop. Deal. Deal. She made chicken and dumplings, a recipe her mother had taught her back in Boston. The familiar motion soothed something in her chest. Kneading dough, stirring broth. For a little while, she could pretend she was just a woman cooking dinner for her family, not a widow hiding from murderers. Emma helped by setting the table, chattering about her day. She'd named all the chickens now. Bessie, Mabel, Dorothy, and Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria. Will raised an eyebrow. She's the bossiest one. Mama said that's a good name for a bossy chicken. Will's lips twitched. Can't argue with that logic. Dinner was the best meal any of them had eaten in weeks. Emma talked constantly, filling the silence that might have been awkward. Will ate steadily, complimenting Eleanor's cooking with quiet sincerity. Haven't had a meal this good since, he trailed off. Since Caroline, Eleanor finished for him. Yeah, she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. It was the first time she'd voluntarily touched him. Tell me about her, if you're willing. Will looked surprised. You want to hear about my dead wife? I do, if you're willing to talk about her. Emma had fallen asleep at the table, her head pillowed on her arms. Will looked at the sleeping child, then back at Eleanor. She was stubborn, he said finally. Fierce, laughed loud, and didn't care who heard. Grew up on a farm, could outwork most men I knew. A faint smile touched his lips. We met at a barn raising. She corrected my hammer technique in front of everyone. Told me I'd brain myself if I kept swinging like that. Were you embarrassed? Mortified, but she was right. He shook his head. I fell in love with her right there. Took me 6 months to convince her I was worth marrying. How long were you together? 3 years. Best 3 years of my life. We built this house together. Planted that garden out back. Dreamed about filling the place with children. His voice roughened. She got pregnant and we were so happy. But the baby came early and everything went wrong. Eleanor squeezed his hand. I'm sorry, Will. I blamed myself for years, still do sometimes. If I'd gotten the doctor faster. If I'd known what to do. He turned his hand over, letting his fingers intertwine with hers. But I've learned that grief don't care about if, it just is. You carry it because you have to. Do you still love her? Every day, I'll love her till I die. He met Eleanor's eyes. But loving someone who's gone don't mean your heart's closed forever. Caroline wouldn't have wanted that. She'd have kicked my backside and told me to live. Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks. James was like that too. At least I think he was. We only had 3 weeks together, but he seemed so full of life in that short time. Always making plans for the homestead. Always dreaming about what came next. She wiped her eyes with her free hand. He died protecting us. Those men wanted the wagon, our supplies. James went for his gun and they shot him. Just like that. 1 minute he was there, and then he wasn't. I'm sorry. The worst part is, I couldn't even bury him. We had to run. I don't even know where his body is now. A man I'd known for 3 weeks, married for 3 weeks, and I had to leave him in the dirt. Her voice broke. Emma keeps asking if Papa James is in heaven, and I say yes because what else can I tell her? But some nights I wonder if his spirit is still out there on that road waiting for me to come back. Will squeezed her hand. His spirit ain't stuck nowhere, Eleanor. A man who died protecting his family, a man like that goes straight to whatever comes next. He's at peace, I promise you that. How can you know? Because I've seen men die, good men and bad ones. And the good ones, they got this look at the end, like they can see something beautiful waiting for them. He paused. James loved you and Emma. He's at peace knowing you're safe. Eleanor let out a shaky breath. I want to believe that. Then believe it. Sometimes faith ain't about knowing. It's about choosing to hope. They sat in silence for a long moment, hands still joined across the table, the sleeping child between them. Finally, Eleanor spoke. I should put Emma to bed. Let me. Will stood and gathered Emma in his arms with practiced ease. The child stirred, murmuring something unintelligible, then settled against his chest. Eleanor watched him carry her daughter to the small bedroom he'd fixed up, watched the gentleness in his hands, the care in his movements. This man who'd lost his own chance at fatherhood, who'd spent 5 years alone with his grief, was holding her daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because to him, Eleanor realized she was. When he returned, Eleanor was standing at the window looking out at the darkness. You're good with her, she said without turning. With Emma. She trusts you. Kids are easy. They see what's in front of them, not all the complicated stuff adults see. Is that why she started calling you Uncle Will? Will went still. She has in her sleep. She was talking last night and she said Uncle Will will keep us safe. Eleanor turned to face him. I hope that's all right. I can tell her to stop if it bothers you. It don't bother me. His voice was rough. It's just, it's been a long time since anyone called me family. Eleanor crossed to where he stood, stopping close enough to touch but not quite touching. Well, I need to tell you something. All right. Those men who attacked us, the one in charge, his name is Clayton Blackwood. She swallowed hard. I saw his face before they put on the bandanas. I'd know him anywhere. There was a wanted poster at the last town we passed through before the attack. $5,000 reward. He's killed dozens of people. Will's expression hardened. Why are you telling me this now? Because I've been lying here for 2 weeks letting you take care of us, and you deserve to know what you're protecting us from. These men, they don't leave witnesses. We were supposed to die, Will. The only reason we didn't is because they got careless and I managed to run while they were... She couldn't finish the sentence. I know what they did. Then you know they'll come looking for us. When they realize we survived, they'll hunt us down. They'll kill us and anyone who gets in their way. Eleanor's voice shook. You should send us away. We've brought danger to your door, and you don't deserve... Stop. Will gripped her shoulders, his hands firm but gentle. Look at me. She did. I knew there was danger the moment I saw you bleeding on my porch. I made my choice then, and I'm making it again now. His eyes blazed. Clayton Blackwood or anyone else wants to get to you and Emma, they go through me first. Why? Eleanor's voice cracked. Why would you risk your life for strangers? You ain't strangers. Not anymore. But Will, Eleanor. He cut her off. I spent 5 years dying in this house, just waiting for God to finally take me because I couldn't see the point of living without Caroline and the boy. Then you knocked on my door, and for the first time since I buried them, I felt something other than grief. What did you feel? Purpose. His grip on her shoulder softened. You and Emma gave me a reason to wake up, a reason to care whether I live or die. That ain't nothing. That's everything. Eleanor felt tears spilling down her cheeks again. I'm so broken, Will. What they did to me. You ain't broken. You're hurt. There's a different day. He released her shoulders and stepped back, giving her space. Broken means you can't be fixed. Hurt means you're healing. And you're healing, Eleanor. I can see it every day. Some days I don't feel like I'm healing. Some days I feel like I'm just surviving one moment to the next. That's still healing. Survival is the first step. The rest comes after. Eleanor wiped her eyes. How do you know so much about this? Because I've been where you are. After Caroline died, I didn't think I'd ever feel anything again. Thought the pain would eat me alive. He paused. But it didn't. Little by little, day by day, it got easier. It never went away completely, but it got easier to carry. Does it still hurt? Every day. But now it's a different kind of hurt. Not the sharp, can't-breathe kind. More like an old wound that aches when it rains. He paused. You'll get there too, I promise. Eleanor nodded slowly. Thank you for understanding, for not treating me like I'm made of glass. You ain't glass. You're iron. Battered some, but not broken. A small laugh escaped her. Iron, I like that better than broken. Good. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow we start figuring out what comes next. What do you mean? Will's expression shifted to something harder. If Blackwood's as dangerous as you say, we need to be ready. I won't let you and Emma just wait around for those men to find you. We're going to make a plan. What kind of plan? The kind that keeps you safe, whatever it takes. Eleanor should have been afraid, should have been overwhelmed by the weight of what was coming. Instead, for the first time since James Fletcher died, she felt something like hope. The next morning, Will brought Eleanor a revolver. She stared at the gun in his hands, her heart racing at the sight of it. The last time she'd seen a gun, James Fletcher had been reaching for his. The last time she'd heard gunfire, her husband of 3 weeks had been dying in the dirt. You know how to use one of these? Will asked. James taught me, back east before we left Boston. Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I'm not a great shot, but I can hit what I'm aiming at. Good. Will pressed the revolver into her hands. The weight of it felt wrong, foreign. I want you to carry this when I'm not around. And I want you to practice. Every day, when Emma's napping, we'll work on your aim. You think they're coming soon? I think they're already looking. Will's jaw tightened. Men like Blackwood, they don't like loose ends. Soon as they figure out you survived, they'll come. But we're going to be ready. So they practiced. Every afternoon while Emma slept, Will set up targets behind the barn and taught Eleanor to shoot with deadly accuracy. The first few times her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the gun. The sound of gunfire sent her back to that terrible night. James falling after 3 short weeks of marriage. The men laughing, her own screams. Breathe, Will said, standing behind her. Don't think about them. Think about Emma. Think about keeping her safe. Eleanor steadied her breathing, raised the gun, fired. The bullet hit wide of the target. Again, she fired until her arms had ached and her ears rang, until the targets were nothing but shredded paper, until the sound of gunfire no longer made her flinch. Don't aim for the body, Will instructed. It's too big, too easy to miss vital spots. Aim for the center of the chest, right here. He touched his own sternum. Hit them, there they go down. I've never shot a person before. And maybe you won't have to, but if it comes to it, you need to be ready. His eyes were serious. You're fighting for Emma's life. For your own. Don't hesitate. Eleanor squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit dead center. Good, Will said. Again. By the end of the second week, Eleanor could hit the center target 5 times out of 6. Her hands no longer shook. The sound of gunfire no longer sent her spiraling into memory. She was becoming something she'd never imagined. A woman who could kill to protect what she loved. I used to believe in turning the other cheek, she said quietly one afternoon, staring at the destroyed targets. In forgiveness and Christian charity. Now I'm not sure what I believe. You believe in protecting Emma, Will said. That's enough. The rest can wait until she's safe. 3 weeks into her recovery, Eleanor decided it was time to contribute beyond cooking and teaching. Her ribs had healed enough that she could move without pain. Her shoulder was strong again. She was still too thin, still bore the fading bruises, but she was functional, capable. I need to work, she told Will over breakfast. Really work, not just helping around the house. You are working, teaching Emma, cooking, healing. I mean earning money, being independent. Eleanor set down her coffee cup. I was a teacher in Boston. I could teach here. Will was quiet for a moment. There's a school in Cedar Ridge. But Eleanor, you going into town being seen? He hesitated. People will talk. And if Blackwood's men are looking, a new woman in town will draw attention. I can't hide forever. I know, but maybe we give it a few more weeks. Let things settle. Eleanor nodded, understanding his caution but hating it. She'd spent 3 weeks hiding in this house, safe but trapped. Part of her knew Will was right. Part of her refused to let fear dictate her life. The decision was taken out of her hands the following Sunday. Will had suggested they attend church in Cedar Ridge. People need to see you, he'd said. Need to know you're under my protection. Otherwise, the gossip will eat you alive. Eleanor dressed carefully that morning in a simple dress Hannah Pierce had brought by. The banker's wife had visited twice now, bringing clothes and supplies and warm friendship. Eleanor liked her immediately. Hannah didn't ask prying questions or look at her with pity. She simply helped. You don't have to do this, Will said as they prepared to leave. If you're not ready, I'm ready, Eleanor lied. The ride into Cedar Ridge was quiet. Emma chattered about the chickens and her reading lessons filling the silence. Eleanor watched the landscape roll by, trying to quiet the fear churning in her stomach. This would be her first time facing people since the attack. Her first time being seen, being judged, being vulnerable in public. Cedar Ridge was a small frontier town. One main street, a general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple that seemed almost absurdly optimistic in this harsh landscape. People were gathered outside, men in their Sunday best, women in carefully pressed dresses. Every head turned as Will's wagon pulled up. The whispers started immediately. Eleanor could feel eyes on her as she climbed down, feel the weight of their curiosity and judgment. She held her head high, kept her expression neutral, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Mr. Bennett, a woman's voice cut through the murmurs. Who is this? The woman who spoke was perhaps 50, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Her eyes were cold as they raked over Eleanor, taking in every detail. Mrs. Whitfield, Will's voice was respectful but firm. This is Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. Widow, she's staying at my ranch. Margaret Whitfield's eyebrows rose. A widow living with an unmarried man. She made the word widow sound like an accusation. Surely you see how this looks, Mr. Bennet. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, but before she could speak, Will stepped forward. Mrs. Hayes is a teacher from Boston. She's recovering from injuries sustained during an attack on her wagon train. She's teaching my ward and keeping house in exchange for room and board. There's nothing improper about the arrangement. We'll see what the church has to say about that, Margaret said primly. Eleanor found her voice. Mrs. Whitfield, I assure you I am a woman of good character. I taught school for 6 years in Boston. My husband was killed by outlaws 3 weeks after our wedding, and I was— She paused, choosing her words carefully. I was injured in the attack. Mr. Bennet has been kind enough to offer shelter while I heal, that's all. Margaret's expression didn't soften. So you say, but appearances matter in a godly community, Mrs. Hayes. We can't have unmarried people living together, regardless of the circumstances. Then I suggest you take your concerns up with the Almighty, Will said quietly, because He's the only one I answer to. He took Eleanor's arm and guided her toward the church entrance. Emma followed, clutching her wooden doll. Behind them, Eleanor could hear the whispers intensifying. The service was torture. Reverend Mitchell's sermon seemed carefully chosen to make Eleanor squirm. He spoke about propriety, about the dangers of temptation, about women who led men astray. Several times his eyes found Eleanor in the congregation, and she felt the weight of his disapproval. Margaret Whitfield sat 3 rows ahead, her back ramrod straight. Eleanor could see her whispering to the women around her, could see heads turning to steal glances. But there were other faces too, sympathetic ones. A young woman who smiled gently, an older man who nodded in greeting, and Martha Simmons, the cafe owner, who caught Eleanor's eye and winked. After the service, Martha approached them in the churchyard. Don't mind Margaret, she said loud enough for others to hear. She's suspicious of everyone who wasn't born within 10 miles of Cedar Ridge. She held out her hand to Eleanor. Martha Simmons, I run the cafe on Main Street. Eleanor shook her hand gratefully. Eleanor Hayes, I heard about what happened to your wagon train. Terrible business. Martha's eyes were kind. If you're looking for work, I could use help with baking. Pays not much, but it's honest. I'd like that very much. Good. Come by Tuesday morning. We'll see how you do. As Martha walked away, Eleanor felt something tight in her chest loosen. One ally, one person who'd looked past the gossip and seen her as human. The ride home was quiet until Emma fell asleep in the back of the wagon. Thank you, Eleanor said to Will, for standing up to Mrs. Whitfield. She's a busybody, but she don't speak for the whole town. She speaks for enough of it, Eleanor paused. Well, maybe I should find somewhere else to stay. I don't want to damage your reputation. My reputation can handle it. He glanced at her. Besides, I meant what I said. You're staying as long as you need. What if they make trouble? Let them try. But trouble came sooner than either of them expected. That night after Emma was asleep, Eleanor found Will in the barn checking on the horses. The familiar smell of hay and leather filled the air. Can't sleep, she asked, settling onto a hay bale. Thinking. About Caroline, about you and Emma, about how strange it is that life keeps moving forward even when you think it's stopped. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Tell me more about her, about Caroline. Will leaned against a stall door, arms crossed. She had this laugh, loud and unrestrained. Used to embarrass her sometimes in public, but I loved it. Meant she was happy, really happy, not just polite. What else? She was stubborn as hell. Once she made up her mind about something, there was no changing it. He smiled faintly. We fought about the dumbest things. Where to plant the garden, what to name the horses, whether to get chickens or just buy eggs in town. She wanted chickens. She won that argument, said a ranch needs chickens. His smile faded. She won most arguments, if I'm honest. She was smarter than me, better with words. I just knew when to give in. Eleanor reached over and took his hand. She sounds wonderful. She was. Will's fingers tightened around hers. But she's gone. And I spent 5 years acting like my life ended with hers. Maybe that was selfish. Grief isn't selfish. No, but refusing to keep living is. He turned to look at her. You and Emma, you reminded me that I'm still here, still breathing, still capable of caring about something. Eleanor's heart was pounding. She could feel the shift happening between them, the air charging with something unspoken. Well, I need to tell you something. All right. I feel guilty sometimes for not grieving James more. We only had 3 weeks together, but still, he was my husband. And here I am sitting with you feeling, she struggled for words, feeling things I shouldn't feel so soon. What kind of things? She met his eyes. Safe, cared for. Like maybe I could have a future after all. Will was quiet for a long moment. James has been dead a month. I ain't gonna tell you how to grieve or when to stop. But I will tell you this. He squeezed her hand. Feeling safe ain't wrong. Feeling cared for ain't wrong. And thinking about the future ain't betraying the past. How do you know? Because if I died tomorrow, I wouldn't want you to spend 5 years in a dark house refusing to live. I'd want you to be happy, to laugh again, to love again if you found someone worth loving. He paused. I think James would want that too. Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I barely knew him. 6 months of letters, then 3 weeks of marriage, that's all we had. I never got to really know my own husband. Did you love him? I loved the hope he represented, a fresh start, a family, safety. She wiped her eyes. But I didn't know him. Not really. Not the way I'm starting to know you. The words hung in the air between them. Will brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. Get some sleep, Eleanor. We'll figure out what comes next. One day at a time. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Eleanor lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her hand still tingling from his kiss. She was falling for him. She knew it, and it terrified her. The following Tuesday, Eleanor started work at Martha's Cafe. The work was simple but satisfying. Baking bread in peace, serving coffee to ranchers and townspeople, making small talk with customers who were curious about the new widows staying at the Bennett Ranch. Most people were kind. Some were cautiously friendly. A few clearly in Margaret Whitfield's camp were coldly polite. Eleanor didn't care. She had work. She had income. She had independence. On her third day, a young cowboy came in for coffee. He was polite, tipped well, and asked if Eleanor was settling in all right. Fine, thank you, she said. Name's Jake. I work for the Morrison Spread east of here. He smiled. If you ever need anything, you let me know. Eleanor thanked him and thought nothing of it. But Will noticed when she mentioned it that evening. What did this Jake look like? Young, 20 maybe, brown hair, friendly enough. Why, Will's expression had gone carefully neutral. No reason, just making conversation. But Eleanor saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand drifted toward his gun belt. Something had spooked him. Well, what is it? Probably nothing. He forced a smile. I'm just being cautious. The next day, Will rode into town for supplies. He told Eleanor he'd be back before dark, kissed Emma on the head, and left. He didn't tell her that he planned to visit the sheriff. Sheriff Tom Wheeler was a grizzled man in his 50s with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. He listened to Will's story without interruption, his expression growing darker with each word. Clayton Blackwood, he said when Will finished. I've been hunting that bastard for 6 months. He's wanted in 3 territories, murder, robbery, assault. He leaned back in his chair. And you're saying Mrs. Hayes can identify him? She saw his face before the attack, knows him on sight. That makes her a dead woman walking. Blackwood don't leave witnesses. I know. Will's voice was hard. That's why I'm here. I need to know if you've heard anything. Strangers asking questions. Men looking for a woman and child. Wheeler was quiet for a moment. Funny you should ask. Had 2 men in here 3 days ago. Said they were looking for family. Woman and child who got separated during some trouble on the trail. Will's blood ran cold. What did you tell them? That I hadn't seen anyone matching that description. But Will, Wheeler leaned forward, they didn't believe me. They're still in the area, asking and around. Someone's going to talk eventually. How long do I have? Days, maybe a week if you're lucky. Will stood. I need to get back. Need to prepare. Wait. Wheeler pulled a wanted poster from his desk. You should see this. The poster showed a sketch of a man's face. Lean features, cold eyes, a scar running down one cheek. Below the image, Clayton Blackwood, wanted for murder, robbery, assault, $5,000 reward. That's him, Will said. That's the man who attacked Eleanor's wagon train. Then she's in more danger than you know. Blackwood's killed entire families to cover his tracks. He won't stop until she's dead. Will folded the poster and put it in his pocket. He'll have to go through me first. He left the sheriff's office and headed for the general store. As he was loading supplies onto his wagon, he heard a familiar voice. Mr. Bennett. Will turned to find Jake, the young cowboy Eleanor had mentioned. Up close, Will noticed details he didn't like. The way Jake's eyes were too sharp. The piece of blue fabric tied around his neck. Fabric that looked suspiciously like torn calico. Help you with something? Will kept his voice neutral. Just being friendly. Heard you got a woman staying at your place. Widow from back east. News travels fast. In a small town, always does. Jake smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Pretty woman like that all alone must be nice to have company. Mrs. Hayes is my housekeeper, nothing more. Course not. Jake's smile widened. But if she's looking for other work, other opportunities, you let me know. Always happy to help a lady in need. Will's hand drifted to his gun. She's got all the help she needs. Now, if you'll excuse me, I got to get home. He climbed onto the wagon and rode out, forcing himself not to look back. But he could feel Jake's eyes on him the whole way. That piece of blue fabric. Eleanor had been wearing a blue calico dress the night she arrived. A blue dress torn at the sleeve. Jake wasn't a cowboy looking for work. He was one of Blackwood's men. And now he knew exactly where Eleanor was. Will rode home faster than was wise, pushing the horses harder than he should. His mind raced ahead, calculating odds, planning defenses. How long before Jake reported back to Blackwood? How long before they came? The sun was setting when he reached the ranch. Eleanor was in the garden with Emma, teaching her to identify herbs. The sight of them, peaceful and unaware, made Will's chest tighten. They had no idea danger was closing in. Eleanor, he called, need to talk to you now. Something in his voice made her straighten. She sent Emma inside to wash up for dinner, then walked over to where Will was unhitching the horses. What happened? That cowboy Jake you told me about, he ain't a cowboy. Will's hands moved quickly, efficiently removing the harness. He's one of Blackwood's men. I saw him in town. He's wearing a piece of blue fabric around his neck, same color as your dress the night you arrived. Eleanor's face went pale. They found us. Not yet, but they will. Jake knows you're here. It's only a matter of time before he tells Blackwood. Then we run. We take Emma and we leave tonight. And go where they'll track us. And out on the trail, we're sitting ducks. Will finished with the horses and turned to face her. We stay here. We prepare. We fight. Fight? Well, there could be 5 of them, 10. We can't. We can. And we will. His voice was firm. This is my land. I know every inch of it. We have defensible positions, weapons, and we'll have help. What help? Sheriff Wheeler, Samuel Pierce, other men in the area who don't take kindly to outlaws. Will gripped her shoulders. Eleanor, listen to me. Running makes you prey. Standing your ground makes you a threat. And I'd rather be a threat. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to fight, to possibly kill. I'm asking you to survive, to protect Emma, to not let those bastards win. She met his eyes, and he saw the moment the fear transformed into something harder, something dangerous. Teach me, she said. Teach me everything you know. For the next 3 days, Will and Eleanor prepared. They practiced shooting until Eleanor could hit a moving target. They planned escape routes and hiding places. They reinforced the house, positioning rifles at strategic windows. They moved Emma's bedroom to the interior room with no windows, the safest place in the house. Samuel Pierce rode over on the 3rd day. Will had sent word, and his old war buddy came prepared. Heard you got trouble coming, Samuel said, dismounting. Hannah's watching our place. I'm here to help. Might get you killed. Wouldn't be the first time I rode into danger with you. Samuel grinned. Remember Shiloh? We were younger and stupider then. Speak for yourself. I'm still stupid. Eleanor liked Samuel immediately. He had an easy manner and kind eyes, and he treated her with respect, not pity. When he learned she could shoot, he nodded approvingly. Good woman to have in a fight. That evening, the four of them sat around the kitchen table planning. Emma was asleep, unaware that her safety hung in the balance. They'll come at night, Will said. Blackwood's smart enough not to attack in daylight where neighbors might see. How many men? Samuel asked. 5, maybe more. Jake's one. Blackwood's another. 3 others at least. Bad odds. We've faced worse. Will traced lines on a rough map he'd drawn. They'll approach from the south. It's the most direct route from town. We position ourselves here and here. He marked spots. Crossfire. They'll be caught in the open. What about Mrs. Hayes and Emma? Root cellar, reinforced door. If things go bad, they hide there. Eleanor spoke up. I want to fight. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. Eleanor Cheyenne, Will started. No, listen to me. I'm not hiding while you risk your lives. I can shoot. You said so yourself. Let me help. Will wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at him to keep her safe, locked away, protected. But he saw the determination in her eyes, saw the woman she was becoming. Strong, capable, refusing to be a victim. All right, he said finally. But Emma stays in the root cellar, and if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. No arguments, Eleanor agreed. The plan was set. Now they waited. But the attack didn't come that night, or the next night, or the night after that. The waiting was almost worse than the fighting would be. Every sound made them jump. Every shadow might hide a threat. Eleanor slept with her revolver under her pillow. Will barely slept at all. On the 4th night, Emma woke screaming from a nightmare. Eleanor rushed to her daughter's room, found her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. The bad men, Emma sobbed. They were here. They had Mama and Uncle Will, and I couldn't help. I was too little again. Shh, baby, it was just a dream. Eleanor held her close. The bad men aren't here. We're safe. But they're coming, aren't they? I heard you and Uncle Will talking. Eleanor pulled back to look at her daughter's face. Yes, she said. There was no point lying. They might come, but Uncle Will and Mr. Samuel and I were ready. We won't let them hurt you. I don't want you to get hurt either. We'll be careful. I promise. Will appeared in the doorway. Everything all right? Bad dream, Eleanor said. Can Uncle Will stay? Emma asked. Until I fall asleep. Course I can, little bit. Will settled into the chair beside Emma's bed. He started telling her a story, something about a brave little girl who saved a kingdom. His voice was low and soothing. Gradually, Emma's eyes closed. Eleanor watched from the doorway. This man, this quiet, damaged man who'd opened his door to strangers, was now telling bedtime stories to her daughter. Something in her chest cracked open. She loved him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She loved William Bennett, not the desperate, clinging love of someone who needed rescuing, but the deep, certain love of someone who'd seen another person's soul and found it beautiful. Will glanced up and saw her watching. Something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, promise. Later, after Emma was asleep, they sat together in the kitchen. Will poured them both coffee, even though it was well past midnight. She's scared, Eleanor said. So am I. I've never seen you scared of anything. I'm terrified, Will admitted. Not of dying. I made my peace with that years ago, but of failing you, of letting them get to Emma, he paused, of losing what I've found. What have you found? Will turned to look at her. A reason to keep going, a reason to hope, a reason to want tomorrow to come. Eleanor's breath caught. Will, I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving James. I know you got every reason not to trust any man after what happened. He took her hand. But I need you to know. When this is over, when Blackwood's dealt with and you're safe, I'm going to ask you something. And I hope you'll say yes. What are you going to ask? You'll know when I ask it. He stood, helped her to her feet. Get some sleep. Tomorrow I'm riding to see Sheriff Wheeler again. Gonna see about organizing a posse. Samuel will stay here with you and Emma. Be careful. Always am. But at the door he paused, turned back, crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and cupped her face in his hands. Eleanor Hayes, you're one of the strongest people I've ever known. And whatever happens, I want you to know. He hesitated. I want you to know you saved my life just as much as I saved yours. And then he kissed her. Not tentative or uncertain, not asking permission, just a claiming, a promise, a declaration. Eleanor's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss tasted of whiskey and hope and tomorrow. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. That was, Eleanor started. Too soon. I know, I'm sorry. Don't be, she smiled. Don't be sorry for that. Will pressed his forehead to hers. When this is over, he said again, when you're safe, we'll figure out what this is. I already know what this is. Yeah, it's the beginning of everything. The next morning, Will rode to Cedar Ridge. The sky was overcast, threatening rain. He left Samuel at the ranch armed and alert with strict instructions to get Eleanor and Emma to the root cellar at the first sign of trouble. Sheriff Wheeler was waiting when Will arrived. Talked to some men, Wheeler said without preamble. Got maybe 12 willing to ride. Most are ranchers who have lost livestock or worse to Blackwood's gang. They want him gone. 12's better than 2. But here's the thing, Will. We need bait. We need to draw Blackwood out. Get him in the open where we can surround him. Eleanor, Will said flatly. She's the only witness who can identify him. She's what he wants. We use that. Absolutely not. I'm not putting her in danger. She's already in danger. At least this way we control the circumstances. Wheeler leaned forward. Think about it. We set up a trap in town. She walks into the general store clearly visible. Blackwood sees her, makes his move. We're ready. And if something goes wrong, if one of his men gets to her before we can stop them. That's the risk, but the alternative is waiting for them to attack your ranch in the middle of the night where Emma could be hurt, where your friends could be killed. Wheeler's eyes were serious. This way we choose the time and place. We have the advantage. Will wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed against using Eleanor as bait. But Wheeler was right. Waiting for Blackwood to strike on his terms was suicide. I need to talk to her, Will said finally. This has to be her choice. He rode home slowly, dreading the conversation. But when he told Eleanor the plan, her response surprised him. I'll do it. Eleanor, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Her voice was firm. I'm tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. Those men killed James after 3 weeks of marriage. They hurt me. They're hunting my daughter. She met his eyes. If I can end this, protect Emma, I'll do it, whatever it takes. It's dangerous. I know, but so is waiting. So is running. At least this way I fight back. Will pulled her into his arms. You're sure? I'm sure. Tell the sheriff we'll do it his way. The trap was set for 3 days later. Enough time to position, men prepare, make sure everyone knew their role. Eleanor would walk into town Tuesday morning, go to the general store, be visible, present. Will would be on a rooftop across the street, rifle ready. Samuel would be in the saloon. Wheeler and his deputies would be positioned at both ends of Main Street. The other men, ranchers, and townspeople who'd volunteered would be hidden in various buildings, a net waiting to close. The night before, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Tomorrow she would face the man who'd killed her husband of 3 weeks, the man who'd hurt her in ways she still couldn't fully process, the man who wanted her dead. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt cold, determined, ready. A soft knock at her door made her sit up. Come in. Will entered carrying a small box. Couldn't sleep either, he said. Thought you might want some company. Always. He sat on the edge of the bed, the box in his lap. I want to give you something. But first, I need to tell you something. All right. Will opened the box. Inside was a silver ring, simple and beautiful. This was my mother's. She gave it to Caroline when we got married. Said it should go to our daughter someday. He looked at Eleanor. We never had a daughter, and Caroline's been gone 5 years. But I think she'd want this ring to have a purpose again. Eleanor's breath caught. Well, what are you saying? I'm saying that when this is over, when Blackwood's dealt with and you're safe, I want you to marry me. He took her hand. I know it's fast. I know you're still grieving James. I know I got no right to ask. But Eleanor, these past weeks with you and Emma, they've been the first time I've felt alive since Caroline died. Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. I can't answer yet. I know, that's why I'm not asking yet. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. I'm just letting you know what I'm asking for. When you're ready. Eleanor looked at the ring, then at Will. What if I'm not ready tomorrow? What if something happens? Then I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. She pulled him down into a kiss, different from the first, deeper, more certain, a promise being made without words. Stay with me tonight, she whispered. I don't want to be alone. Will kicked off his boots and lay down beside her, Eleanor curled against his chest, his arms around her. Safe, protected, loved. Will, yeah. After tomorrow, after this is done, ask me again. Ask you what, you know what? He tightened his arms around her. And what will you say? You'll have to ask to find out. They lay together in the darkness, listening to each other breathe. Tomorrow would bring danger, violence, possibly death. But tonight they had this moment, this peace, this beginning. Eleanor fell asleep with Will's heartbeat steady beneath her cheek and his mother's ring on her finger. Tuesday morning dawned gray and cold. Eleanor dressed carefully, choosing a green dress that Hannah had brought. She braided her hair, pinned it up, looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was different from the one who'd arrived at Will's door 2 months ago. Stronger, harder, alive in a way she hadn't been even before the attack. Emma was staying with Hannah at the Pierce Ranch. Eleanor had said goodbye that morning, holding her daughter close. Are you coming back? Emma had asked. Yes, baby, I promise. You promise to be careful too. I will be. Uncle Will and Mr. Samuel and the sheriff, they'll all be there. I'll be safe. Emma had hugged her tight. I love you, Mama. I love you too, more than anything in this world. Now sitting in the wagon beside Will as they rode toward Cedar Ridge, Eleanor touched the ring on her finger. Still there, still real. A promise of tomorrow if tomorrow came. You can still back out, Will said. We'll find another way. No, this ends today. They reached town just after 9. Main Street was quiet, too quiet. The usual morning bustle was absent. Shop doors were closed, windows shuttered. The townspeople who'd been warned were staying inside away from the danger. Will helped Eleanor down from the wagon. I'll be on the roof across from the general store. You'll be in my line of sight the whole time. He cupped her face. Anything feels wrong, you get inside and hit the floor. Understand? I understand. And Eleanor, I love you, in case I don't get another chance to say it. She kissed him. You'll have plenty of chances. Now go. We have work to do. Will climbed to his position. Eleanor watched him disappear onto the rooftop, then turned toward the general store. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She touched the revolver hidden in her skirt pocket. Ready. She pushed open the door to the general store. Hank Morrison, the shopkeeper, nodded at her. He knew the plan, knew his part. Play normal. Act like nothing was wrong. Mrs. Hayes, what can I get you today? Just looking, thank you. Eleanor moved through the store, pretending to examine fabrics, picking up items, putting them down, making herself visible through the front window. Waiting. Minutes crawled by. 10, 20, 30, nothing. Maybe Blackwood wasn't coming. Maybe Jake hadn't reported back yet. Maybe this whole plan was... The door opened. Eleanor's breath stopped. A man entered, tall, lean, a scar running down his left cheek, eyes like chips of ice. He wore trail dust and gun leather and the casual confidence of someone who'd killed and would kill again without hesitation. Clayton Blackwood. Their eyes met. Recognition flashed in his. Surprise, then fury, then cold calculation. He'd been hunting her for weeks, tracking, searching, and now here she was standing in broad daylight in some backwater town, alone, unprotected. The arrogance in his expression said it all. He probably thought it was a gift, thought she was stupid enough to feel safe here. His overconfidence would be his downfall. Well, well, he said. His voice was exactly as Eleanor remembered. Smooth, cultured, wrong. Mrs. Fletcher, or is it Hayes? Now I confess I've lost track of your marital status. Eleanor's hand moved toward her pocket. Don't. Blackwood's gun was out faster than she could blink. Put your hands where I can see them. She raised her hands slowly. You're making a mistake, she said. The whole town knows you're here. The sheriff is 3 counties away, according to my sources. And as for the town, Blackwood smiled, they know better than to interfere with my business. He moved closer. Hank Morrison had disappeared into the back room. Coward, Eleanor thought. Or smart. Hard to tell. You've caused me considerable trouble, Mrs. Hayes. Surviving when you should have died. Running when you should have stayed put. Forcing me to chase you across the territory. Blackwood's gun never wavered. But all that's done now, you're going to walk out that door with me nice and quiet, and then we're going to finish what we started. I'm not going anywhere with you. Then I'll shoot you right here and burn this town to the ground looking for your daughter. Your choice, Mama. Emma, the threat to Emma made Eleanor's blood run cold. But before she could respond, the door behind Blackwood opened. Jake walked in, followed by two other men, all armed, all smiling. Caught her like a rabbit in a snare, Jake said. Blackwood didn't take his eyes off Eleanor. Where's Bennett? Probably watching from wherever he's hiding. Ain't gonna do him no good. Jake pulled something from his pocket. A pocket watch, silver. But Eleanor's sharp eyes caught the difference immediately. Will's father's watch had initials engraved on the back. This one was blank. Nice try, Eleanor said coldly, but Will's watch has his father's initials. That one's a fake. Jake's face darkened, but before he could respond, Blackwood spoke. Enough games. We're leaving. Now. Eleanor's hand dove for her pocket. She pulled the revolver, fired wild. The bullet went wide, shattering a window. Blackwood cursed Dove behind a counter. His men scattered, and suddenly the street outside exploded with gunfire. Will wasn't dead. He was very much alive and very, very angry. His first shot took down Jake, clean through the chest. The young outlaw dropped like a stone, surprise frozen on his face. Sheriff Wheeler and his men poured into the street from every hiding place. 12 armed men against 3 remaining outlaws. The math wasn't complicated, but Blackwood was smart and fast. He grabbed Eleanor, using her as a shield, his gun pressed to her temple. Everyone stop or she dies. The street went quiet. Will's rifle was trained on Blackwood's head, but he didn't have a clear shot, not without risking Eleanor. Let her go, Wheeler called. It's over, Blackwood. Surrender and you get a trial. Keep this up and you die here. I'm walking out of here with the woman. Anyone tries to stop me, she dies first. Blackwood started backing toward the door, dragging Eleanor with him. She could feel his heartbeat, fast but steady, could smell whiskey and sweat and gunpowder, could feel the gun barrel cold against her skin. All those hours of practice, all those targets, all that preparation. And now when it mattered, she was helpless. Or was she? Will had taught her more than shooting. He'd taught her to think, to use every advantage. And right now, Blackwood thought she was a helpless woman. A victim. He was wrong. Eleanor went limp, dead weight. Blackwood stumbled, his grip loosening for just a second. Eleanor twisted, drove her elbow into his ribs, dropped to the floor. Will's shot cracked through the air. Blackwood spun, blood blooming on his shoulder. Not a kill shot. Will had aimed to disable to capture alive. But Blackwood was raising his gun, aiming at Eleanor on the floor. Eleanor's revolver was still in her hand. She fired, once, twice, 3 times. Center mass, just like Will taught her. Blackwood dropped, hit the floor hard, blood spreading across the wooden boards. His eyes found Eleanor's, surprised, angry, dying. He rasped. Eleanor stood, looked down at the man who'd killed her husband of 3 weeks, who'd hurt her, who'd hunted her child. I'm not a victim, she said. Not anymore. Blackwood's eyes went dark. The street erupted in shouts. Men running, Wheeler checking the bodies, someone calling for Doc Webb. But Eleanor didn't move. She stood there, gun in hand, staring at the man she'd killed. Then Will was there, pulling her into his arms, holding her while she shook. It's over, he said. It's over. You're safe. Eleanor dropped the gun. Her hands were covered in blood. Blackwood's blood. The blood of the man she'd killed. I shot him, she said numbly. I killed him. You defended yourself. You survived. I'm glad I did it. The words came out broken. That's what scares me. I'm glad he's dead. That's human. That's normal. Will pulled back to look at her face. Eleanor, you protected yourself. You protected Emma. You did what you had to do. Sheriff Wheeler approached. Mrs. Hayes, I need to take your statement. But first, are you all right? Are you hurt? I'm fine. She looked at the bodies. Jake. Two others she didn't recognize. Blackwood. Are they all dead? Jake and Blackwood, yes. The other two are wounded. They'll live to hang. Wheeler's expression softened. You did good, ma'am. Blackwood's been terrorizing this territory for 2 years. You ended it. The townspeople were emerging now, coming out of their homes and shops, staring at the bodies. At Eleanor. At the blood. Margaret Whitfield appeared, her face pale. Mrs. Hayes, she said quietly. I was wrong about you. What you did today, the courage you showed? She swallowed hard. I owe you an apology, and my thanks. We all do. Eleanor just nodded. She couldn't find words. Martha Simmons pushed through the crowd. Come on, honey. Let's get you cleaned up. You don't need to stand here. She led Eleanor to the cafe, sat her down, brought water and a cloth. Eleanor washed the blood from her hands, watching it turn the water pink. I killed a man, she said. You killed a monster, Martha corrected. There's a difference, Rita. Outside, they could hear the sheriff organizing the cleanup. Bodies being moved, statements being taken. The normal business of death in a frontier town. Will appeared in the cafe doorway. Can I take her home? Martha nodded. Take her home, Mr. Bennett, and take care of her. Always. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Eleanor sat beside Will, his arm around her shoulders. She was trembling, though, whether from shock or cold or relief, she couldn't tell. When they reached the ranch, Samuel was waiting. He'd returned from the Pierce place with Emma, who came running. Mama, you're back. Eleanor caught her daughter in her arms, holding her tight. I'm back, baby. I'm safe. We're safe. The bad men gone. They can't hurt us anymore. Emma pulled back to look at her mother's face. Did you have to be brave again? Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Yes, baby, I did. I knew you would be. You're the bravest mama in the whole world. That night, after Emma was asleep, after Samuel had ridden home, after the adrenaline had faded and exhaustion set in, Eleanor found Will in the garden. She sat beside him on the bench he'd built there. Their place, under the stars. You asked me something last night, she said. Will turned to look at her. I did. And I said to ask me again after this was over. It's over. Eleanor held up her left hand. His mother's ring caught the moonlight. Then ask me. Will took her hand in both of his. Eleanor Hayes, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? Will you make this house a home again? Yes, Eleanor said. Yes to all of it. Yes to you. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promises. Tomorrow, next week, next year, all the tomorrows they'd fought for, all the tomorrows they'd earned. When they finally pulled apart, Will rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said. I love you too. And Will thought, yeah. Thank you for opening the door. That night I knocked. Thank you for letting us in. Best decision I ever made. They sat together in the darkness, holding hands, watching stars appear in the clear Nebraska sky. Tomorrow there would be arrangements to make. Legal proceedings, paperwork, the mundane aftermath of violence. But tonight there was this. Peace, safety, love. The beginning of everything they'd been promised and everything they'd fought for. Emma was safe. Blackwood was dead. And Eleanor had found something she hadn't known she was looking for. Home. The week following Clayton Blackwood's death passed in a strange haze. The bodies were buried in the cemetery outside town. Not in the section with the respectable dead, but in the far corner reserved for criminals and outcasts. No markers, no mourners. Just raw earth covering men who'd lived by violence and died by it. Eleanor attended for form's sake. Reverend Mitchell spoke briefly about judgment and redemption, but his heart wasn't in it. These men had terrorized the territory. Their deaths were a relief, not a tragedy. Afterward, people approached Eleanor with thanks and wonder. The teacher from Boston who'd killed Clayton Blackwood. The widow who'd ended a reign of terror with 3 well-placed bullets. I'm not a hero, she told Will that evening in the garden. I just wanted to survive. Sometimes that's the same thing. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. I keep thinking about his face, Eleanor said. The moment the bullets hit, the surprise in his eyes, like he never really believed I'd do it. Good, He underestimated you. That's why he's dead and you're alive. But Will, I'm glad he's dead. I keep waiting to feel guilty, to feel horror at what I did. But all I feel is relief. What does that make me? Will turned to look at her. Human. It makes you human. He took her hand. Eleanor, you didn't hunt him down for revenge. You didn't shoot an unarmed man. You defended yourself against someone actively trying to kill you. There's no shame in that. 3 weeks later, Eleanor stood in front of Martha's cafe looking at the sign hanging in the window. Help wanted. Baker and server. Good wages. Inquire within. Martha appeared in the doorway. You going to stand out here all day or come inside? Eleanor pushed through the door. The cafe smelled of coffee and fresh bread. I saw the sign, Eleanor said. Good, because you're hired. Martha didn't wait for Eleanor to accept. $7 a week plus tips. Hours are 6 to 3, Tuesday through Saturday. Sundays off. Martha, I haven't even said yes yet. Don't need to. I know you're going to. Martha poured coffee. Besides, you're the best baker I've ever had. Eleanor accepted the coffee. Thank you. Not just for the job, for everything. For being kind when others weren't. We're friends, Eleanor. That's what friends do. Even Margaret Whitfield had undergone a transformation. An apology, a real one. Margaret folded an apology, a real one. Margaret folded her hands on the table. I was cruel to you when you first arrived. I made assumptions about your character based on nothing but gossip and my own small-mindedness. Mrs. Whitfield, please let me finish. Margaret's voice was firm. I've lived in Cedar Ridge for 30 years. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing individuals and started seeing categories. Outsiders, strangers, threats. She looked at Eleanor with something like shame. You weren't a threat. You were a woman in desperate need of help, and I met you with judgment instead of compassion. That was wrong. Eleanor didn't know what to say. I appreciate that, she finally managed. Truly. More than an apology, I'd like to make amends. The church is looking for a new school teacher. The position is yours if you want it. Eleanor's breath caught. Are you serious? Entirely. You're educated. You have teaching experience. And you've proven you have strength to handle difficult situations. Margaret's lips twitched. I suspect rowdy children will seem tame after facing down Clayton Blackwood. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I'd love to teach again. Thank you. That evening, she told Will and Emma over dinner. I'm going to be teaching again, Eleanor said, at the school in Cedar Ridge. Emma's eyes went wide. Really, Mama? You're going to be a teacher again? I am, and you're going to be one of my students. But I already know how to read. Then you'll help me teach the younger children. Eleanor smiled. What do you think? Can I count on your help? Yes, Emma bounced in her seat. Can I tell the chickens? Go ahead, baby. Emma scampered outside, leaving Eleanor and Will alone. A teacher, Will said. Seems fitting. It feels right, like I'm finally becoming myself again. Will reached across the table and took her hand. You're remarkable, you know that. I'm just a woman trying to build a life. No, his voice was serious. You're a woman who survived the unthinkable and chose to keep going. That's what makes you remarkable. He paused. Eleanor? Yes. It's been a month since I asked you to marry me. Eleanor's heart skipped. So it has. Will stood, came around the table and knelt beside her chair. I'm asking again. Eleanor Hayes, will you marry me? Eleanor looked at him. This good, damaged, beautiful man who'd opened his door to strangers, who'd taught her to fight, who'd loved her when she didn't think she could be loved. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Will pulled the ring from his pocket and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, just as it always had. When, he asked. Soon. As soon as we can arrange it. I don't want to wait anymore. Neither do I. He kissed her, then slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Emma was standing in the doorway grinning. You're getting married. We are, Eleanor confirmed. How do you feel about that? Emma ran over and threw her arms around both of them. I feel like we're finally a real family. We've been a real family for a while now, a little bit, Will said. This just makes it official. They set the wedding for 3 weeks later. Hannah Pierce helped with arrangements. Samuel would stand up with Will. Martha offered to make the food. Margaret Whitfield donated fabric for Eleanor's dress. Nothing too fancy, Margaret said, but something worthy of a bride. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright. The ceremony was held in the garden behind the house. Will had spent the past week making it beautiful. Samuel had built an arbor. Hannah had decorated it with wildflowers. About 30 people attended. Townspeople, neighboring ranchers, friends. Sheriff Wheeler came, as did Doc Webb. Even some of Eleanor's students made an appearance. Reverend Mitchell performed the ceremony. He spoke about second chances and redemptive love, about two people who'd known loss finding hope in each other. Do you, William Bennett, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Eleanor Hayes, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Eleanor looked at Will, really looked at him, saw the love in his eyes, the certainty, the promise of tomorrow. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Will pulled her close and kissed her, and Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. Peace, belonging, home. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Food and music and laughter. Martha brought out a cake. Margaret Whitfield gave a toast. To Eleanor and Will, she said, raising her glass. May their love be as strong as their courage. To Eleanor and Will, the crowd echoed. Later, as the sun began to set, Will found Eleanor standing alone at the edge of the garden. Happy, he asked. Incredibly. She leaned against him. Though I keep expecting to wake up and find this is all a dream. It's real. I promise you it's real. Eleanor turned to face him. I love you, William Bennett. I love you too, Eleanor Bennett. Eleanor Bennett, her new name, her new life, her new beginning. As the party continued behind them, Will took her hand. Come with me. I want to show you something. He led her to the house up to the bedroom they would now share. On the bed was a package wrapped in brown paper. What's this wedding present? Open it. Eleanor unwrapped the package carefully. Inside were books, a dozen of them, all new, all beautiful. For your classroom, Will said. Figured the school library could use some additions. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Well, this is too much. Nothing's too much for you. He kissed her forehead. You gave me my life back. Books seem like a fair trade. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the schoolhouse watching her students work on their arithmetic. 23 children, ages 5 to 14, all bent over their slates. Emma sat in the front row helping younger students. At 8 years old, she was reading far beyond her age. Mrs. Bennett, Eleanor turned to find Sarah holding up a completed assignment. I finished the geography questions. Can I start on the composition? Of course. As Sarah returned to her seat, Eleanor felt a wave of dizziness. She gripped the edge of her desk, waiting for it to pass. This had been happening for the past week. Dizziness, nausea in the mornings, exhaustion. She knew what it meant. That afternoon after school ended, Eleanor rode to Doc Webb's office. He examined her, asked questions, and then smiled. Congratulations, Mrs. Bennett. You're about 3 months along. Baby should come around Christmas. Eleanor's hand went to her stomach. You're sure? As sure as I can be. Have you told your husband? Not yet. I wanted to be certain first. Well, you're certain now. She rode home slowly. A baby. She was carrying Will's child. Joy and terror filled her in equal measure. Will was in the barn when she arrived. He looked up when she entered, smiled. How was school? Good. Eleanor paused. Will I need to tell you something? His smile faded. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She took a breath. I'm pregnant, about 3 months along. Doc Webb confirmed it. Will's hands stilled. He stared at her, expression unreadable. We'll say something. He set down his work and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. A baby, he said, his voice rough. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy? He pulled back to look at her face. Happy, Eleanor. I'm terrified and thrilled and can't quite believe it's real. He placed his hand gently on her stomach. But yes, I'm happy. So happy. I'm scared, Eleanor admitted. What happened to Caroline? Won't happen to you. I won't let it. His voice was fierce. We'll do everything right. Doc Webb will be here and Hannah. We'll make sure you're safe. You can't promise that. I can promise I'll do everything in my power to protect you. He kissed her forehead. Both of you. That evening they told Emma over dinner. She squealed with delight. I'm going to be a big sister. You are, Eleanor confirmed. What do you think about that? I think it's wonderful. I'll teach the baby everything. Will laughed. Maybe let the baby learn to walk first. But I can start planning now, right? You can start planning, Eleanor agreed. The months passed quickly. Eleanor's body changed, rounding with the growing child. She taught school until November when her condition became too obvious. Margaret arranged for a temporary replacement. Don't worry, she said. Your position will be waiting when you're ready to return. Eleanor spent her final months preparing, sewing tiny clothes, setting up the cradle Will had built, reading books on childbirth, trying to quiet the fear. Hannah visited often, bringing reassurance. You're strong, she told Eleanor. You've survived worse than childbirth. Have I? Caroline was strong too. Caroline had complications. Every pregnancy is different. Hannah took Eleanor's hand. You're healthy. The baby's healthy. Trust your body. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. Eleanor woke before dawn with cramping in her back. She lay still, timing the intervals. Regular. Increasing. Labor. Will, she said quietly. He woke instantly. What is it? The baby. It's coming. Will was out of bed in seconds, moving with controlled urgency. I'll get Doc Webb. Hannah, you stay here. We'll wait. He paused at the door. I'm scared. He came back, knelt beside the bed, took her hands. I know. So am I. But Eleanor, you're one of the strongest people I've ever known. You can do this. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll deal with it, together. But nothing's going to go wrong. You hear me? You're going to be fine. The baby's going to be fine. He kissed her, fierce and desperate, then left. Eleanor lay in bed, breathing through contractions. Emma appeared in the doorway. Mama, is the baby coming? Yes, sweetheart. Emma climbed onto the bed and took Eleanor's hand. I'll stay with you until they get back, so you're not alone. Doc Webb arrived within the hour, Hannah right behind him. They examined Eleanor with professional efficiency. Everything looks good, Doc said. Baby's positioned right. This should be straightforward. The labor lasted through the day and into the night. Long, exhausting hours. Will stayed by her side, holding her hand, murmuring encouragement. You're doing great. Just a little longer. I'm right here. As night fell on Christmas Eve, as candles flickered, Eleanor felt the final overwhelming urge to push. That's it, Doc Webb said. One more, big push. Eleanor pushed with everything she had, screaming through the pain. And then miraculously there was crying. A new voice in the world, small and furious and alive. It's a boy, Doc Webb announced, placing the infant on Eleanor's chest. A healthy boy. Eleanor looked down at her son through exhausted tears. He was perfect. Will, she breathed. Look at him. Will was crying openly. He's beautiful. You did it. Eleanor, you did it. We did it. Together. After Doc Webb finished his work, after Hannah helped Eleanor into a clean nightgown, they were finally alone. Will, Eleanor, and their son. Emma was allowed in, tiptoeing carefully. Can I see him? Come here, baby. Emma Mom climbed onto the bed, peering at her new brother with wonder. He's so small. You were this small once. What's his name? Eleanor and Will had discussed this. James, Eleanor said. James William Bennett, after his two fathers. Will's breath caught. Eleanor? I want to. James Fletcher gave me Emma. Gave me the courage to start over. You gave me this life, this love, this family. Our son should carry both names. Will pressed his forehead to hers. James William Bennett. Welcome to the world's son. They sat together, the four of them, as Christmas morning dawned. A family, imperfect and beautiful and complete. 10 years later, Eleanor stood in the schoolhouse dismissing her students for the day. Remember, your compositions are due Monday. The children filed out. Emma, now 18 and helping as assistant teacher, stayed behind. Mama, you should go home. Papa's probably wondering where you are. Eleanor smiled at her daughter. Beautiful, capable Emma. You're right. Let's go home. They walked to the wagon where Will waited. At 45, he'd gained a few more gray hairs, but was still strong and steady. How was school? He asked as they climbed aboard. Productive. How was the ranch? Good. James helped me mend the north fence. That boy's got a natural talent. James, their eldest son, was 10 now. Serious and responsible. And Caroline, at the Pierce's place with Hannah. Caroline, 8 years old, was their daughter, named for Will's first wife. She had Eleanor's spirit and Will's quiet strength. They drove home through the gathering dusk. The ranch had grown, more cattle, more land, prosperity built through hard work. Emma was engaged to Samuel and Hannah's eldest son. The wedding was planned for next spring. They reached the ranch as the sun set. James and Caroline ran out to greet them, followed by the dogs. Inside, the house smelled of dinner cooking. They sat down together, all five of them, sharing stories about their day. Eleanor looked around the table at her family, this family she'd built from broken pieces, and she felt overwhelming gratitude. Later, after the children were in bed, Will found Eleanor on the porch. Their porch, their place, their ritual for 10 years now. Thinking again, he asked, always? What of it about this time? Eleanor leaned against him. About that night, the night I knocked on your door, how terrified I was, how certain we were going to die. But you didn't. No, we lived. We more than lived. We thrived. She turned to look at him. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't answered the door? Every day, and every day I'm grateful I did. They sat in comfortable silence watching the stars emerge. Well, do you remember what you said to me that first night? I said you knocked and I was tired of keeping the door closed. You gave me more than shelter that night. You gave me a future, hope, love, a family. Her voice caught. You gave me everything. No, Will said. We gave each other everything. He pulled her close and they sat together as the Nebraska night settled around them. Inside the house, their children slept safely. In the barn, horses and cattle settled. In the distance, coyotes called to each other. This was home. Not the house, not the land. Home was this feeling, this certainty, this love. Eleanor thought about the scared, broken woman who'd stumbled onto this porch 10 years ago. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who'd learned that survival wasn't enough. That healing was possible. That love could bloom even in the darkest soil. Well, thank you for opening the door. Thank you for having the courage to knock. They sat together until the moon rose, two people who'd found each other in darkness and built a life in light. Two broken souls who'd healed each other. Two strangers who'd become family. And in the quiet of that perfect moment, Eleanor understood something profound. Home wasn't a place you were born. It wasn't somewhere you arrived. Home was something you built day by day, choice by choice, with the people brave enough to open their doors and let you in. She'd knocked on a stranger's door asking for a barn to sleep in. He'd given her a home, and together they'd created something beautiful, something lasting, something worth every mile of walking through darkness, every moment of fear, every scar earned along the way. This was their story, and it was complete. The wind whispered through the prairie grass. Inside the house, a clock chimed. One of the children called out in their sleep, then settled. Life continued in all its messy, beautiful glory. And on the porch of the Bennett Ranch, two people who'd saved each other sat hand in hand, watching the stars and dreaming of all the tomorrows still to come.